Vance Candlelight had exactly 4 seconds to register that the stapler flying off his desk was not, in fact, a stapler anymore, before the world folded in on itself like wet paper. That was the last clear thought he had as himself. The office had been humming with its usual afternoon noise. Phones ringing, someone microwaving fish they'd been warned about twice this month, the copier jamming for the 3rd time, when the ceiling light above his cubicle sparked, sputtered, and detonated in a shower of glass and blue-white current. He remembered throwing his arm up. He remembered the smell of ozone. He remembered thinking, with the particular clarity of a man who talked entirely too much even inside his own head, "This is a lawsuit. This is definitely a lawsuit. I am absolutely calling my cousin who does personal injury." And then he was somewhere else entirely. Not somewhere. Someone else entirely. He woke slowly, the way you surface from a nap you didn't mean to take, blinking up at a ceiling that was too clean, too tasteful, too expensively minimalist to belong to any office building he'd ever set foot in. Silk sheets pooled cool against skin that felt wrong. Longer fingers. A different weight to his own limbs. When he lifted a hand to rub his eyes, a curtain of pale, platinum hair slid across his vision, and Vance Candlelight, a man who had never in his life been left speechless, lay there in absolute silence for 11 full seconds. Then he sat bolt upright and said, Okay, no. Absolutely not. This is not my hair." His voice came out wrong too, softer and used, like a room nobody had opened the windows in for years. He found the nearest reflective surface, which turned out to be the glass door of a walk-in closet the size of his old studio apartment, and stared at a stranger's face wearing his own expression of pure betrayal. Sharp cheekbones, ice-pale eyes, a mouth that looked like it had spent a very long time being told to stay closed. "Louis Leiter," he said aloud, testing the name the way you'd test a bruise, and something in the borrowed body's memory answered back, quiet, aching, endless, like a drawer sliding open to reveal a life folded very neatly and very sadly inside. He got the broad strokes fast, the way you absorb a language you didn't know you already spoke. Omega, 26. Married 4 years to an alpha named Resnick Ashcombe, a man with a good jaw and a better lawyer, who currently kept 2 separate calendars. One for his wife, and one for the woman he saw on Tuesdays and Thursdays in a hotel 2 blocks from his office. Louis had known. Louis had always known, the way you know a storm is coming from the smell of the air, and Louis had said nothing, because Louis was the kind of person who apologized to furniture when he bumped into it. Vance felt something in his borrowed chest go hot and tight. "Oh, honey," he murmured to the empty room, to the ghost of the man whose skin he was wearing. "Absolutely not. We are not doing that anymore." He found Resnick in the kitchen 40 minutes later, drinking coffee in a robe like a man with nothing to hide, which, Vance now knew intimately, he very much did. "You're up early," Resnick said, not looking up from his phone. "I found the hotel receipts," Vance said pleasantly, pulling a mug from the cabinet like he'd lived there his whole life, which technically some quiet, buried part of him now had. "The ones you keep in the glove box. Under the ice scraper. Very creative hiding spot. Truly, I was moved." The mug slipped a little in Resnick's hand. "Louis. It's actually not Louis anymore. Don't worry about the mechanics of that. It's a whole thing," Vance said, waving a hand. "But the important part is that I know, and more importantly, he knew, for probably a year now, and he never said a single word to you, which frankly is its own tragedy we can unpack never, because I am not doing that. I don't do quiet. I have never once in my life done quiet." Resnick's face shifted through confusion, irritation, and something that might have been the first flicker of real fear. "Are you feeling all right?" "I'm feeling fantastic," Vance said, and meant it in the reckless, electric way he'd always felt fantastic right before he burned a relationship to the ground. "I'm feeling like a man who is done. I want a divorce. I already called someone this morning. Turns out your husband's assistant is shockingly efficient once properly motivated, who knew, and the papers will be here by Thursday. You can keep the hotel. I hear the sheets are nice." He set the mug down, untouched, and walked out of a marriage that wasn't his, in a body that wasn't his, with a lightness that felt suspiciously, dangerously good. 3 days later, papers signed, apartment abandoned, a single suitcase in hand, and absolutely no plan beyond survive the next 24 hours, Vance Candlelight, currently residing as Louis Leiter, wandered into a supermarket because his stomach had started making sounds that embarrassed even him. That was where he heard the shrieking. Not distress shrieking. Delight shrieking, the kind that came from small lungs with no sense of consequence, and it was coming from the cereal aisle, where a boy who couldn't have been older than 5 was sprinting one direction with a box of something neon-colored held over his head like a trophy, while a girl who looked maybe 7 was army-crawling under the bottom shelf toward a bag of marshmallows with the grim determination of a soldier storming a beach. And standing in the middle of it all, looking like a man who had aged a decade in the last 10 minutes, was the single most attractive person Vance had ever seen in either of his lives. Tall, broad through the shoulders in a way that filled out his jacket without trying. Brown hair styled with the kind of care that suggested it hadn't survived contact with the actual day. And eyes, when the man turned, scanning wildly for the girl who'd vanished under the shelving, a startling, clear aqua blue that looked entirely too tired for someone that handsome. "Cups in, get down from there, spoonful, I can see your shoes, sweetheart, that is not a hiding spot." Vance did not decide to get involved. That was important to note later, when he tried to explain himself. He simply was involved, the way weather happens to a picnic, because some people are built to walk past chaos, and some people, some very specific, very talkative people, are built to walk directly into it. "Hi," Vance said, crouching down and snagging the girl by the ankle just as she made a final desperate lunge for the marshmallows. "You must be Spoonful, which is genuinely an incredible name. I need the full story on that later, but right now I think your dad would very much like his shoes back on his heart rate." The girl went still, blinking up at him with wide, startled eyes. The universal look of a child who has just met an adult that speaks their language. "You're not supposed to grab strangers," she informed him. "Correct, excellent point, very safety conscious," Vance said, straightening her up and setting her gently on her feet. "I'm Lewis. Now we're not strangers." Problem solved. Behind him, a large hand closed gently around the collar of the boy, cups in mid-sprint, hauling him back with the ease of long practice. "Thank you," the man said, breathless, staring at Vance like he'd personally descended from somewhere. "I turned around for 11 seconds. 11. I timed it. How do they move that fast?" "Small bodies, low center of gravity, no fear of consequence," Vance said sagely. "It's a design flaw, honestly. Someone should file a complaint." That got a laugh out of the man, surprised, a little rusty, like it hadn't come out in a while. "Lazarus," he said, shifting cups in onto his hip like it cost him nothing, though the box of cereal was still clutched triumphantly in the boy's fist. "Lazarus tableware. And this is cups in, and the escape artist you just apprehended is Spoonful." "Lewis Lighter," Vance said, and the name still sat strange in his mouth, like a coat that didn't quite fit yet, but he wore it anyway. "Though fair warning, I talk. A lot. Like concerning amounts. My last relationship ended partly because I apparently never stopped narrating, which rude but not wrong." "That's fine," Lazarus said, and something in his tired, handsome face eased, like a man setting down a weight he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it was there. "I haven't had an adult conversation that wasn't about invoices in 3 weeks. You could recite a grocery list, and I'd consider it the highlight of my month." Spoonful tugged on Vance's sleeve. "Are you coming with us?" "Spoonful," Lazarus said, mortified. "What?" "He caught me. That means he's ours now. Cupson caught a lizard last week, and we kept that." "I am not comparable to a lizard," Vance said, delighted, "though I respect the logic." Lazarus looked at him over the children's heads, a long, searching look, equal parts apology and something warmer he clearly hadn't meant to let show yet, and said, "You don't have to. But if you wanted to help me pick out cereal that isn't 90% dye, I'd consider it a personal favor. It's been a long day. It's been a long few years, honestly." Vance Candlelight, who had never once in either life managed to mind his own business, who had ended relationships over gossip and burned bridges out of restlessness, and sworn up and down that children were absolutely, categorically not in his plans, looked at this exhausted, gorgeous, hopeful stranger holding 2 small chaotic humans, and felt something in his borrowed chest turn over like a key finding its lock. "Lead the way," he said. "But I'm warning you now, I have opinions about cereal. Strong ones. This could take a while." "Good," Lazarus said, and meant it. "I've got nowhere else to be." Behind them, Cupson had already opened the neon cereal box and was eating it dry, straight from the container, while Spoonful narrated the entire event like a sports commentator. It was, without question, the strangest first meeting Vance had ever had. He had a feeling it wouldn't be the last surprising thing about this particular alpha, or this particular life he'd been handed, sideways and unasked for, like a gift nobody had bothered to wrap properly. He found, walking beside Lazarus tableware down the cereal aisle, with 2 small hurricanes trailing behind them, that he didn't mind one bit. 2 weeks into whatever this was, Vance refused to name it, mostly because naming things made them real and real things could be taken away. A philosophy he developed approximately 4 minutes after his divorce papers cleared. He found himself standing in Lazarus Tableware's kitchen at 7 in the morning, mediating a dispute over waffles. "They have to be square," Cupson was saying, with the gravity of a boy delivering a verdict in a war crimes tribunal. "Round waffles don't have corners. Corners are the best part. Round waffles have more edge," Spoonful shot back, already vibrating with the injustice of it. "Because a circle is just infinite corners, my teacher said so." "Your teacher did not say that." "She implied it." Vance, who had wandered into this domestic war zone in one of Lazarus's old sweatshirts because his own clothes were still in a suitcase he hadn't fully unpacked in the guest room he was absolutely not supposed to be treating like his own room, set 2 plates down between the combatants with the solemnity of a diplomat. "Both of you are wrong, and also both of you are right, which is the worst possible outcome for an argument, and I want you to sit with that." Cupson blinked. "That doesn't make sense." "Welcome to adulthood, buddy. Nothing makes sense, you just get bigger and pretend it does." Vance dropped into the chair beside him and stole a piece of bacon directly off Lazarus's plate as the man walked in, tie half knotted, looking like he'd fought his way through a hurricane just to find his shoes. "That was mine," Lazarus said, without heat, sliding into the seat across from him. "It was ours. We're a household now. Shared resources." Vance took a bite, entirely unbothered, and Lazarus just looked at him. That same look he'd been giving him for 2 weeks now, equal parts exhausted and helplessly fond, like a man who'd been cold for years and had finally wandered too close to a fire and couldn't make himself step back. "You know," Lazarus said, "you were only supposed to help me carry groceries to the car. That was the entire arrangement. And yet here I am," Vance said, gesturing grandly at the kitchen. The kids, the burnt waffle spoonful was now aggressively drowning in syrup. "Fully integrated into your family unit within a fortnight. Truly, I have a gift." "You really do," Lazarus murmured, and something about the way he said it, quiet, private, meant only for Vance, even with 2 children shrieking about waffle geometry 3 feet away, made heat crawl up the back of Vance's neck in a way that had nothing to do with the coffee. He was saved from having to figure out what to do with that feeling by his phone buzzing against the counter. He glanced at it, expecting spam, and instead found 3 missed calls and a text from a number he recognized with a small, unpleasant jolt. "Resnick *, we need to talk. It's not about the divorce." Vance stared at it for a beat too long, and Lazarus, sharp, observant, the kind of man who noticed when a room's temperature changed by half a degree, caught it immediately. "Everything all right?" "Fine," Vance said too quickly, sliding the phone face down onto the counter like that would make the message disappear. "Just my ex being dramatic. It's a whole genre of behavior with him, truly. He should win awards." Lazarus didn't push, which Vance was quietly, fiercely grateful for. Lazarus never pushed. He just watched, patient as a man who'd learned the hard way that some things had to be offered, not extracted. But the crease between his brows lingered a moment longer than casual concern usually did. He didn't call Resnick back until that evening. Once the kids were down and the apartment had gone soft and quiet around him, the particular hush of a home that had absorbed a full day of noise and was finally exhaling. "What?" Vance said, when the call connected. No pleasantries, because he'd never wasted pleasantries on Resnick, even in the 4 days he'd known him as a husband. "You've been different," Resnick said, without preamble, and there was something strange in his voice. Not accusatory, exactly. "Careful. Since the accident at your office. You're not you anymore." Vance's stomach dropped, cold and sudden, straight through the floor. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, too fast, too flat. "Lewis." Resnick's voice cracked slightly on the name, and for the first time since Vance had walked into that kitchen and calmly dismantled a marriage, he heard something almost like grief in it. "I loved you. Badly, and not enough, and I know that, but I did. And the man who left me 2 weeks ago wasn't the man I married. I need to know what happened to you. Please." Vance sat very still on the edge of the guest bed, phone pressed hard to his ear, and felt the fragile architecture of his new life shudder like a building that had just discovered its foundation was a secret. "I have to go," he said, and hung up before Resnick could say anything else, before the question could take a shape he'd have to answer, and sat in the dark with his heart going too fast, thinking about square waffles and aqua blue eyes and a life that had never been his to begin with, and how badly, how stupidly, how completely he had already fallen for the wrong side of it. He didn't mean to still be awake when Lazarus knocked, soft, on the doorframe an hour later. "Saw your light on," Lazarus said, leaning against the frame in a t-shirt and sweatpants, all the sharp lines of his daytime self softened by exhaustion and low lamplight. "You've been quiet since dinner. You're never quiet. It's a little alarming, honestly." "I contain multitudes," Vance said, but it came out thin, and Lazarus, damn him, damn his perceptiveness, crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed without being invited, close enough that Vance could feel the warmth radiating off him like a held breath. "Talk to me," Lazarus said. Simple. No pressure behind it, just an open door. And that was the thing about Lazarus' tableware that had cracked Vance open faster than he'd ever let anyone crack him open before. He asked. He didn't assume, didn't demand, didn't fill the silence with his own guesses the way every partner before him had. He just sat there, patient as riverbank stone, and waited to be let in. "My ex thinks something happened to me," Vance said finally, staring at his own hands. Lewis's hands, pale and long-fingered, still not entirely familiar even now. He's not wrong. Something did happen to me. I just can't tell him what, because he'd never believe it, and honestly some days I'm not sure I believe it either. "Try me," Lazarus said. Vance let out a breath that shook a little at the edges. "If I told you I wasn't always this person, that I woke up in this body a few weeks ago and I don't fully know how or why, and that the man whose life this used to be is just gone, and I'm wearing what's left of him, would you believe me, or would you have me committed?" He expected a laugh, a gentle deflection, the careful, humoring tone people used on someone they thought was joking badly. Instead, Lazarus went very still. "My wife died 2 years ago," he said quietly, which was not the response Vance had braced for at all. "Complications after spoonful. And for months afterward I used to swear I could feel her in the room. The kids used to say things she would have said, word for word, things they couldn't have known. I stopped telling people that story because everyone looked at me like I'd lost my mind." He turned, and his aqua eyes found Vance's in the low light, steady and open in a way that made something in Vance's chest ache. "So no, I'm not going to have you committed. I don't fully understand it. But I believe that the world is stranger than people give it credit for, and I believe you, Lewis, or whatever I should be calling you now." "Vance," he said, before he could stop himself, the truth of it slipping out soft and unguarded. "My name, the one that was mine first. Vance Candlelight." Lazarus said it like he was testing the shape of it, careful, like something precious. "Vance." A small, wondering smile. "It suits you." Louder than Lewis ever was. "I talk too much," Vance said, half a laugh, half something raw. "I ruin things by talking too much. That's usually the part where people leave. You saved my daughter from a marshmallow-related crime spree and let my son eat cereal like a raccoon, and somehow made my kitchen sound like a home again in 2 weeks. Lazarus reached over, slow enough to be refused, and tucked a strand of platinum hair behind Vance's ear, his palm warm and grounding against his cheek. "I'm not going anywhere because you talk too much, Vance. I think I've been waiting a long time for someone who would." The air between them went taut, charged, the kind of silence that wasn't empty at all but full. Full of 2 weeks of stolen glances over waffle disputes, of a hand lingering too long on a grocery cart, of a man who talked constantly finding, for the first time in either of his lives, that he didn't have a single word left to say. So he didn't say anything. He leaned in instead, and Lazarus met him halfway, and the kiss that followed was slow and careful at first, asking, still asking, even now, before Vance's hand fisted in the front of his shirt and pulled him closer, and the careful, patient man dissolved into something hungrier, something that had clearly been starving quietly for 2 years and hadn't let itself admit it until right now. When they finally broke apart, breathless, foreheads resting together, Lazarus let out a low, unsteady laugh. "Well," he said, "that's certainly one way to end a quiet evening." "I told you," Vance murmured against his mouth, heart hammering, Resnick's phone call and every fear that had come with it fading into something distant and unimportant. "I don't do quiet." "Good," Lazarus said, kissing him again, slower this time, like he had all the time in the world to learn every version of this. "I think I'm done with quiet too." Somewhere down the hall, a small voice, spoonful, clearly not asleep, clearly listening at her cracked door, whispered gleefully to her brother. "Asterisk told you he was staying, asterisk." Neither man pulled away fast enough to pretend they hadn't heard it, and neither of them, for once, minded at all. The trouble with falling for someone quietly, Vance was learning, was that the world had a way of getting loud about it right when you least wanted it to. It started with a knock at the front door on a Saturday morning. While Lazarus was upstairs wrangling Cupson into actual pants, and Spoonful was narrating a puppet show to an audience of exactly one stuffed rabbit. Vance answered it with flour on his hands, mid-pancake-related crisis, and found Resnick standing on the porch in an expensive coat that did nothing to soften the tight, wounded look on his face. "You didn't answer my calls," Resnick said. Vance's stomach dropped straight through the floorboards. "You can't just show up at," he caught himself, glanced back over his shoulder toward the stairs. "This isn't my house. I know whose house it is." Resnick's jaw tightened. "I did some digging, Lewis. Vance, whoever you are now. A man matching your old boss's description came by my office looking for you 2 days ago, saying you vanished from work without a word right around the time you started acting like a stranger. Something happened to you, and I think I deserve to know what, since apparently everyone else in your life gets the truth except me." "Nobody's getting the truth, Rez, because there isn't a tidy version of it," Vance hissed, stepping fully onto the porch and pulling the door mostly shut behind him. "I don't have an explanation that won't make me sound insane." "Try me," Resnick said, and it landed strange in Vance's chest, an echo of a gentler voice that had said the exact same words to him a week ago and meant something entirely different by them. Before he could answer, the door swung open behind him, and Lazarus filled the frame, Cupson balanced on one hip, still working on a shoe. He took one look at the tension coiled in Vance's shoulders and the unfamiliar Alpha standing too close on his porch, and his whole posture shifted. Not aggressive, but immovable, a wall built out of quiet certainty. "Everything all right out here?" "This is Resnick," Vance said tightly. "My ex-husband." Something flickered across Lazarus's face. Surprise, maybe a flash of something sharper. Gone as fast as it came, tucked away behind the same patient calm he wore like armor. "Lazarus," he said, offering a hand Resnick didn't take. "I'd invite you in, but it looks like you and Vance have something to finish out here first." The use of the name, Vance, not Lewis, landed like a struck match. Resnick's eyes cut sideways, sharp and searching. "Vance," he repeated slowly. "That's new." "It's not new," Vance said. "It's just finally being said out loud." Resnick studied him for a long, silent moment. The stubborn set of his mouth, the fire in eyes that used to be so carefully banked down, and something in his face cracked open, not with anger this time, but a kind of tired, dawning grief. "You really aren't him anymore, are you?" he said quietly. "Whoever Lewis was. He's just gone." "He's not gone," Vance said, softer now, because for all his talking, all his restless noise, he wasn't cruel, and he understood grief when he was standing in the middle of it. "I think I'm carrying pieces of him whether I mean to or not. But no, I'm not him. I never really got the chance to be, and I'm sorry that means you lost something you can't get back. I really am. But I'm not coming back to be him for you." Resnick nodded slowly, something in his shoulders finally loosening, like a held breath finally let go. "Take care of him," he said to Lazarus, of all people, and it wasn't a challenge, it was strangely a request. Then he turned and walked back down the porch steps, coat flaring behind him, and didn't look back. Vance exhaled like he'd been holding it for 2 weeks. "You okay?" Lazarus asked, setting Cupson down so the boy could immediately vanish back into the house, shouting something about pancakes. "I will be." Vance leaned into him without quite meaning to, forehead against his shoulder, and Lazarus's arm came around him automatically, like it had always belonged there. That was the last loose thread. "I think. Officially." "Good," Lazarus murmured into his hair. "Because I was 2 seconds from doing something very unlike myself out there." Vance huffed a laugh against his chest. "My hero." That night, once the kids were finally, blessedly asleep and the house had gone soft and dim around them, Vance found himself pulled gently into Lazarus's room, the door clicking shut behind them with a quiet finality that felt like a question being answered rather than asked. "You don't have to," Lazarus said, hands settling careful and warm at his waist, giving him every chance to step back. "I know," Vance said, and closed the distance instead, answering with his mouth before his words could get in the way for once. The kiss deep and unhurried at first, then hungrier, both of them chasing 2 weeks of restraint they'd finally stopped pretending they had. What passed between them after that was slow and tender and fiercely wanted on both sides. The low murmur of Lazarus's voice checking in against Vance's skin. The way Vance laughed breathlessly into his shoulder between the intensity of it. Two people who had each spent so long being careful, with everyone else finally choosing not to be careful with each other. The lamp burned low, then went dark, and the rest of the night belonged only to them. Afterward, tangled together in the quiet, Vance's head on Lazarus's chest and Lazarus's fingers tracing slow, absent circles against his spine, Vance broke the silence the way he broke every silence, helplessly, happily. "So," he said, "hypothetically, if Spoonful asks tomorrow why I'm not in the guest room." "We tell her the guest room had a draft," Lazarus said, deadpan, and Vance's answering laugh rang out loud and bright and utterly unbothered into the dark, exactly the way it was always meant to. 6 weeks in, Vance Candlelight had accumulated 3 important pieces of knowledge. Cupson was allergic to being told no in front of an audience. Spoonful negotiated like a hostage crisis expert, and Lazarus Tableware, for all his easy warmth at home, turned into someone entirely different the moment his phone rang with his mother's name on the screen. "You're tense," Vance observed, watching him pace the length of the kitchen, jaw tight, knuckles white around his phone as the call finally ended. "My mother wants to meet you," Lazarus said, in the tone of a man delivering a diagnosis. "Officially. At the house. Sunday." "Okay," Vance said slowly. "Is that a problem? I'm delightful. I do well with parents. I once got my college roommate's mother to write me a recommendation letter after knowing her for 40 minutes. She's not like other mothers." Lazarus scrubbed a hand down his face. "She hasn't approved of anyone since Marisol died. She didn't approve of Marisol, for that matter, not fully, thought she wasn't traditional enough, and Marisol was about as traditional as they came. My mother has opinions about Omegas. About family lines. About," he hesitated, "about the fact that I have 2 children and, in her words, still owe her a proper heir situation, which is an insane thing to say to your grieving son, but here we are." Vance felt something cold slide down his spine, quiet under the noise he usually led with. "Define heir situation. She thinks whoever I end up with should be able to have children. More children. It's old-fashioned and cruel, and I've told her 100 times it isn't anyone's business, but she's going to ask. She always asks. Within the first 10 minutes, usually." The kitchen went very quiet, the kind of quiet Vance usually filled without thinking, and for once he didn't fill it at all. Because here was the thing he hadn't said out loud yet, not to Lazarus, not to anyone in this life. Vance Candlelight had never wanted children. Not before the accident. Not in the old life he could still feel humming faintly under Louis Leiter's borrowed skin. He'd kept the rule like a vow. No babies, said flatly and without apology to every partner who'd ever asked. A boundary that had ended more than one relationship all on its own. It wasn't cruelty. It was self-knowledge, hard-won and non-negotiable, and he'd never once regretted holding the line. He just hadn't expected to fall in love with a man whose family had opinions about it before he'd even worked out how to say it out loud himself. "Vance." Lazarus's voice had gone careful, noticing the silence the way he noticed everything. "You've gone quiet. That's never a good sign with you." "I need to tell you something," Vance said, and for the first time since he'd walked uninvited into Lazarus's chaotic supermarket afternoon, he felt something like fear sit heavy in his chest. "And I need you to actually hear it, not just be polite about it." Lazarus pulled out a chair, sat, gave him his full attention. The same patient, total focus he gave every crisis in this house, waffle-related or otherwise. "I'm listening." "I don't want kids," Vance said, plain, no cushioning, because softening it would only make the eventual landing worse. "Not someday, not with the right person, not ever. It's not about Cupson or Spoonful. God, I adore those 2 menaces, that's not in question. But the idea of carrying, of being pregnant myself. I've never wanted that, not once, not in this body or the one I had before. It's the one rule I've never bent for anyone. I need you to know that before your mother sits across from me on Sunday and asks the wrong question." He braced for it, the flicker of disappointment, the careful recalculation he'd watched cross a dozen faces over the years, the beginning of the end dressed up as understanding. Instead, Lazarus reached across the table and took his hand, steady and sure. "Vance," he said, "I already have 2 children I would die for. I'm not looking for someone to give me more. I was looking for someone who'd stay in the room during the hard parts, who'd actually want to be here for the 2 I've got instead of just tolerating them for my sake." His thumb traced slow, grounding circles over Vance's knuckles. You've stayed for 6 weeks of waffle wars and bedtime negotiations and spoonfuls increasingly elaborate puppet shows. That's the thing I actually needed. The rest was never a requirement. Not from you. Something in Vance's chest, coiled tight since the words air situation had left Lazarus's mouth, finally loosened. You mean that? I mean that. Lazarus lifted his hand and pressed a kiss to his knuckles, easy and certain. My mother's opinions are hers to carry. They don't get to be yours. 6 weeks, Vance said pleasantly. Give or take a marshmallow-based incident. And you're an Omega. It wasn't a question. Good stock, I hope. Healthy. Extremely healthy, Vance said, smile never wavering. Blood work's excellent. Cholesterol's a little high, but that's mostly the pancakes, and frankly I regret nothing. I meant, Delphine said, with the particular patience of a woman used to getting her way, for children. Lazarus needs an heir with proper standing. And given Marisol's line was already unconventional, I would hope you understand the importance of. I don't have children, Vance said, still smiling, voice light as a knife is light. I'm not going to have children. Not with Lazarus, not with anyone, not ever, and I'd rather you hear that plainly from me now than spend the next however many years hoping I'll change my mind, because I won't. I love your grandchildren fiercely. I am not, however, a breeding program. The table went dead silent. Cups in, halfway through smuggling a roll under the tablecloth, froze mid-theft. Spoonful's eyes went wide with delighted horror. Delphine's mouth thinned to a hard line. Lazarus, are you going to let him speak to me that way? Lazarus set down his fork, unhurried, and reached over to rest his hand at the small of Vance's back. Quiet, deliberate, a claim laid without a single raised voice. He's not speaking to you any way I don't agree with, Mother. Vance stays because I want him here. Not because of what he can or can't give this family beyond exactly what he's already given it. His aqua eyes were steady, unyielding in a way Vance hadn't seen from him before. Not since the porch, not since Resnick. If that's not acceptable to you, that's something you'll need to make peace with on your own time. Delphine's gaze cut between them, her son's quiet, immovable resolve, Vance's chin lifted and unbowed, 2 children watching with rapt, gleeful attention, and something in her rigid posture finally, grudgingly, gave an inch. Well, she said stiffly, reaching for her teacup again, at least he's not boring. Under the table, Vance felt Lazarus's hand find his and lace their fingers together, warm and certain and thought, with a fierce, unfamiliar gladness that had nothing to do with the life he used to have and everything to do with the one he'd stumbled sideways into. That he had never once, in either body, been so glad to be exactly loudly, unapologetically himself. 3 months in, Vance had almost let himself believe the hard part was over. He should have known better. Nothing that started with a stapler exploding into cosmic rearrangement ever ended tidily. It began with a headache, sharp, sudden, dropping him to his knees in the middle of the kitchen while he was supposed to be burning grilled cheese for Cupson's after-school snack. The room tilted. For one disorienting second, the kitchen wasn't Lazarus's kitchen at all. It was a different one, smaller, dimmer, with yellowed wallpaper and a window that looked out onto a garden Vance had never seen in his life, and someone was crying in it, softly, endlessly, and it wasn't him. Then it was gone, and he was on the floor, and Cupson was shaking his shoulder with real fear in his small face. Lewis. Vance. You're scaring me. I'm fine, buddy, Vance managed, though his hands wouldn't stop trembling. Just got dizzy. Go tell your dad I said the grilled cheese is his problem now. He didn't tell Lazarus about the vision. Not that night, not the next, though the headaches kept coming. Twice more that week, each one dragging him sideways into fragments that didn't belong to him. A hospital room. A voice that sounded like his own borrowed one, whispering, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I just wanted someone to notice. A ring, slipping off a thin finger onto a nightstand. He recognized, with a cold, sinking dread, that he wasn't remembering Louis Leiter's life anymore. He was remembering Louis Leiter's death. He finally cracked on a Thursday, 3 weeks after the first episode, when a headache hit him hard enough in the grocery store parking lot that Lazarus had to half-carry him to the car, Spoonful and Cupson white-faced and silent in the back seat in a way that broke something in Vance's chest more than the pain did. That's it, Lazarus said, voice tight with barely restrained fear once the kids were dropped safely with a sitter, and it was just the 2 of them in the quiet of the parked car. You're telling me what's happening. Now. All of it. So Vance told him. The visions. The wallpaper. The whispered apology that sounded like a goodbye. The ring on the nightstand. Lazarus went very still, hands white-knuckled on the wheel. You think that Lewis is trying to come back? I think, Vance said slowly, piecing it together in real time, the way he was piecing together everything else about this impossible life, that I didn't take over an empty house. I think Lewis was still in there, somewhere, quiet the way he was always quiet, and I've been so loud these past few months, I might have been drowning him out. And now something's shifting. I don't know what it means. I don't know if it means I disappear. The words sat heavy and terrible in the space between them. Lazarus reached over and gripped his hand hard enough to hurt, like he could physically anchor him there through sheer force of will. You are not disappearing, he said, fierce and low. I didn't fall in love with a placeholder, Vance. I fell in love with you. Loud, nosy, opinionated, waffle-obsessed you. I'm not losing that because some cosmic paperwork error wants a refund. Despite everything, despite the fear sitting cold in his gut, Vance let out a wet, startled laugh. Cosmic paperwork error. That's genuinely the most romantic thing anyone's ever called me. I meant it as a threat to the universe, not a compliment to you, Lazarus said, but his thumb was tracing soft, desperate circles over Vance's knuckles, and his eyes were too bright. We'll figure it out. We are not losing this over something neither of us understands. I refuse. They found the answer, absurdly, in a shoebox at the back of the guest room closet. Lewis's guest room, once, before it became storage for the pieces of himself Vance had never quite unpacked. A shoebox full of unmailed letters, dated across the last year of a marriage that had slowly suffocated a gentle, silent man from the inside out. Vance sat on the floor and read every one, Lazarus beside him, quiet and steady, letting him take his time. The last letter wasn't addressed to Resnick at all. To whoever finds this, it read, in handwriting so careful it looked etched rather than written. Asterisk, I don't know how to be loud enough to be heard. I don't know how to want things out loud. If something ever happens to me, if I ever just stop being able to keep going the way I have been, I hope whatever comes after gets to be braver than I was. I hope they get to say the things I never could. I'm not scared of disappearing. I'm scared of never having mattered at all. Asterisk. Vance sat with that for a long, silent moment, the paper trembling in his hands, understanding, finally, fully, that the headaches weren't Lewis trying to reclaim his life. They were Lewis, quiet and gentle even now, finally getting to feel what it was like to be loud through someone else. Finally getting to matter. I don't think he wants his life back, Vance said slowly, voice thick. I think he just wanted to know somebody actually lived it the way he never let himself. I think he's not fighting me. I think he's finally at peace. Lazarus pressed a kiss to his temple, gentle as a held breath. Then let him rest, he murmured. You keep living loud enough for both of you. That sounds like exactly the kind of ending he'd have wanted. The headaches never came again after that night. Not once, not in all the loud, chaotic, waffle argument-filled years that followed. But sometimes, in a quiet, unguarded moment, Vance would feel something warm settle behind his ribs like a hand on his shoulder, gentle and grateful, and he understood it, without needing words for it at all. Somewhere in the parts of him that used to belong to someone else, Lewis Leiter was finally quietly happy. And in the house that had somehow become entirely, unmistakably his, full of arguing over waffle shapes and Spoonful's dramatic puppet shows and Lazarus's steady, patient love wrapped around all of it like a held breath finally released, Vance Candlelight, for the first time in either of his lives, had absolutely nothing left to say. He just smiled, laced his fingers through Lazarus's, and let the noise of his own happy, chaotic, thoroughly earned family fill up all the silence he'd never known he was missing. A year and a half after a stapler had upended his entire existence, Vance Candlelight stood in the same supermarket where it had all started, holding a basket in one hand and swatting away Cupson's attempt to sneak a third box of the neon cereal with the other, and thought, not for the first time, that his life made absolutely no sense and he wouldn't trade a second of it. 1 box, he said. We've discussed this. You get 1 box of the Die Nightmare cereal and you eat actual food the rest of the week. Those were the terms. Dad lets me have 2, Cupson said, testing the waters with the confidence of a boy who had clearly not run this claim past Dad first. Dad is currently at work being an adult, and I am the acting authority on cereal law in his absence, Vance said. 1 box. Spoonful, now 8 and infinitely more strategic than her brother, didn't even bother arguing. She simply slipped a second box into the cart when Vance turned to check his list, a maneuver so smooth he almost respected it too much to catch her. I saw that. Worth a try, she said, unbothered, and Vance laughed despite himself, the sound easy and loud in a way that turned heads down the aisle, the way it always had, the way it probably always would. He'd stopped apologizing for that a long time ago. They found Lazarus waiting by the car when they got outside, having left work early. A habit he'd never quite broken since the day he'd first watched a stranger wrangle his children in a cereal aisle and felt something in his chronically exhausted heart sit up and take notice. He looked, even now, faintly disbelieving of his own good luck every time he watched Vance coming toward him, arms full of grocery bags and children's complaints in equal measure. "How was the cereal negotiation?" he asked, taking the heaviest bags without being asked. "I lost," Vance admitted. "Spoonful ran a smuggling operation right under my nose. I'm almost proud." "That's my girl," Lazarus said, and Spoonful beamed like she'd been awarded a medal. It was on the drive home, Cupson narrating an increasingly elaborate story about a lizard he'd definitely seen at school, and Spoonful loudly disputing the lizard's existence, that Vance felt it, a small, strange flutter low in his stomach, unfamiliar enough that he went quiet for the first time all afternoon. Lazarus noticed instantly, the way he noticed everything. "You okay?" "I don't know," Vance said slowly, one hand pressed lightly to his stomach, something between wonder and pure disbelieving panic crossing his face. "I think I might need to see a doctor. Like soon. Like this week." It turned out, 3 days and one very thorough appointment later, that the universe, having already rearranged Vance Candlelight's entire existence once, apparently for sport, had decided his old ironclad rule was due for one final, spectacular exception, delivered with all the chaotic timing of everything else in his life. He sat in the car afterward in stunned silence, while Lazarus gripped the steering wheel like it was the only solid thing left in the world, both of them staring straight ahead at nothing. "I said no babies," Vance said finally, faintly. "I said that for years. I built my entire romantic identity around that sentence." "I remember," Lazarus said, equally dazed. Very passionately, actually, more than once. "And now I'm—" Vance gestured vaguely at himself, at the doctor's office receding in the rearview mirror, at the entire unraveling architecture of a boundary he'd held for 2 lifetimes. "I don't even know how I feel. I need you to not have an opinion for exactly 30 more seconds while I have one." Lazarus, wisely, said nothing, and simply reached over and took his hand, steady as he'd been steady through every headache and every ghost and every impossible turn this strange, borrowed, beloved life had thrown at them. 30 seconds passed. Vance let out a long, shaking breath, and when he finally looked over, there was something bright and terrified and unmistakably happy breaking across his face. "Okay," he said. "Okay, I think this one's different. This isn't someone else's rule I inherited or someone else's life I fell into. This is mine. I'm choosing this. Loudly and on purpose, which is frankly the only way I do anything." "Loudly and on purpose," Lazarus repeated, voice thick, and pulled him into a kiss right there in the parking lot, careless of who might see, the same unhurried, certain way he'd kissed him that first quiet night in the guest room that had stopped being a guest room a long time ago. They told the kids that evening over dinner, Spoonful shrieking with a joy loud enough to rival Vance's own, already drafting a list of names with the confident authority of an 8-year-old who considered herself the household's foremost expert on everything, and Cupson mostly concerned with whether a baby would want to see his lizard. Delphine, when informed, sniffed once and said, "Well, it's about time," which from her was practically a benediction, and even sent over a truly excessive quantity of baby blankets within the week, monogrammed, because apparently grudging affection ran in the family. And late that night, once the house had gone soft and quiet the way it always did once the day's chaos finally wound down, Vance lay tangled against Lazarus's chest, one hand resting over the place where an entirely new, entirely unexpected chapter of his impossible life was just beginning, and found himself thinking, unexpectedly, of a shoebox full of unsent letters and a gentle, quiet man who'd never gotten to say the things he wanted. "I hope they get to be braver than I was," Lewis had written. "I hope they get to say the things I never could. I think I finally said all of them," Vance murmured into the dark, not quite to Lazarus, not quite to himself. "Said what?" Lazarus asked sleepily, pressing a kiss into his hair. "Nothing," Vance said, smiling against his chest, warm and certain and entirely, unapologetically loud even in his happiness. "Just everything, I think." Finally, outside, the house settled into its familiar night sounds. Cupson's soft snoring down the hall, the creak of old pipes, the particular hush of a home that had survived transmigration and grief, and one very dramatic supermarket rescue to become, somehow, against every rule Vance Candlelight had ever set for himself, exactly where he belonged. He closed his eyes, Lazarus's heartbeat steady beneath his ear, and for the first time in either of his strange, tangled, thoroughly lived lives, he wasn't looking for the next bit of trouble to talk his way into. He'd already found everything worth staying loud for.